What is up, everybody? Nick Skrip here on the P2W Fantasy Podcast, which is a direct affiliate of the Fantrax Network. It is nearly August, which means we are closer and closer to actual football. It's a very exciting time of year. We are seeing tons and tons of camp hype. I thought it was the perfect time to bring back on a more consistent basis the P2W Fantasy Podcast, which is something that has meant a lot to me through the years. Been working on a ton of stuff for Fantrax as the NFL content lead and social media manager. I want to implement this show more consistently so that you guys can not only see content, but also hear it from me. We're going to throw in the old school video here just to hype up this podcast being back. Let's get it.
Play to win, no fear to give. I feel, but I can't forgive. I go all in this time, yeah, I won't regret. I'll pick the best on trip, they don't understand. I play to win, yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Yeah, play to win, I play to win. Oh, play to win, I play to win. Yeah, play to win, I play to win.
So the basis of the show today is to talk to you guys about 2024 bounce back candidates. But before we get into that, I did want to touch base as a DJ Moore truther, as a Bears homer, about this DJ Moore extension that we had wind of today. So DJ Moore extended by Chicago, 4 years, $110 million. This is coming after a huge season in his first year in Chicago, 136 targets, 96 catches, 1,364 career high receiving yards, 8 receiving touchdowns, also a career high, 16.9 fantasy points per game, which ranked 9th. So we had a very, very good season, year one in Chicago, very well translated to fantasy football. I think there has been question marks for this coming season. You have a rookie quarterback who is a very good prospect in Caleb Williams, but now you have a little bit more target competition in Keenan Allen, who was very good when healthy last season, Rome Odunze, who led the FBS in receiving yards this past year. Cole Kmet, of course. Gerald Everett also will serve as the tight end too. DeAndre Swift will catch passes. But I think that this contract was a statement. Hey, this was our guy last season, DJ Moore. He was the focal point of the passing game. We do have more guys in town to support Caleb Williams and the passing attack, but DJ Moore is that guy. I think it speaks a lot to DJ Moore in Dynasty. We look at the importance of guys for not just a single season in Dynasty, but multiple seasons, right? And I think DJ Moore is a guy that is going to have a long-term importance to Chicago. So very excited about that. Very excited to see him extended, not just as a Bears fan, but as a DJ Moore fan. So wanted to make sure we touched base on that before we got into the bounce backs here. So the basis of the show is bounce backs, guys that had a poor or a down 2023 season, but can improve for fantasy football in 2024. Typically, these guys have had an injury the season prior that impacted their success on the field, impacted their fantasy football season. So with that being said, I have a list of guys. I think it's like 14-ish guys that I think can bounce back for fantasy football in 2024. Sometimes when guys have a down year, fantasy football is a very emotional-based game. People fade them in drafts or undervalue them because of what they did the previous season, even if they were coming off of an injury, even if they did get banged up. So I think this list of guys are going to have nice impacts and a bounce back season for fantasy football in 2024. So the first one on my list here, Kyler Murray. I've been hyping him up all off season here. Following the ACL tear in 2022, Murray would go on to play just 8 games in 2023. Through those 8 games, he averaged 18.9 fantasy points per game, which marks his 5th straight season in a row averaging at least that for fantasy football. In 2 of his 5 seasons played, he's actually averaged 22.2 and 24-ish fantasy points per game, which ranked in the top 4 for the position in each of those seasons. So that was back in 2021 and 2020. So we've seen huge seasons for fantasy football out of Kyler Murray. Looking ahead to 2024, the Cardinals look like a much different offense. Arizona drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. with the 4th overall pick in this year's NFL draft. He checks all of the boxes that you look for in an alpha wide receiver one. Everything you look for is in him. He's the next Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, sort of a highly drafted prospect that comes in and balls out right away. Trey McBride exploded last season once he commanded that tight end 1 role for the Cardinals. The connection to Kyler Murray looked very nice. Michael Wilson will look to build off of his flashes from last year as a 3rd-round rookie. Zay Jones is new in town, but he served a solid complement piece in other homes previously. James Conner is going to be the workhorse running back with Trey Benson behind him, who might be the best handcuff or one of the best handcuffs in fantasy football. Kyler, we know, has dual threat upside as a passer and a rusher. His opening 2 seasons, he actually had some nice volume through the air. I think we see that again, just knowing that he has that Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride combo. And I think he can have a top 5 season for fantasy football. So very high in Kyler Murray. I've actually never been super high in him for reasons I probably couldn't even give you right now. But this is the first year I am all in on Kyler. Kirk Cousins. In 2023, Kirk Cousins was performing to an MVP level. Weeks 1 through 8 prior to the Achilles tear. During that span, he ranked number 2 in passing yards. He was tied for number 1 in passing touchdowns, number 6 in total fantasy points, and number 8 in fantasy points per game. So not only was he, doing well through the air statistically, it directly translated to fantasy football. And Cousins always seems like a guy that's not super sexy to roster, but he finishes well each year. He's averaged 18 plus fantasy points per game for 4 straight seasons. And I think he was on his way to a big season prior to that injury. 2024, it's a new home in Atlanta. He leaves behind Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and TJ Hawkinson, 3 very good playmakers. But then he lands in a new home with 3 playmakers there themselves, former first-round talents in Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan Robinson. Those are 3 anchors. You got the anchor wide receiver in London, the anchor tight end in Kyle Pitts, and the anchor running back in Bijan Robinson. I think that these 3 guys, being young elite talents, are guys hungry to actually prove themselves, because I don't think any of them have had the season quite yet that they feel that they can and that we expect out of them. I think Kirk Cousins elevates this entire offense. There's going to be more passing volume and more quality of passes in 2024. Mark Andrews. 2023 meant only 9 full games for Andrews due to injury, but we saw a lot of what we already knew about him through the games he's played. Andrews finishes a top 12 fantasy football tight end in 6 of the 9 games he played, and a top 3 fantasy tight end in 3 of those 9 games. Across the last 5 seasons, so 2023 through 2019, Andrews has averaged 13.5, which ranked 5th, 12.7, which ranked 3rd, 17.7, which ranked 1st, 12.2, which ranked 4th, and 13.8, which ranked 5th fantasy points per game for the position. Dominant fantasy football tight end. That's his resume. Andrews finished 2021 with 154 targets, 107 receptions, and 1,361 receiving yards. He caught 10 touchdowns back in 2019 as well. Andrews' resume is not the only encouraging part of 2024 for him and this bounce back proposal, right? Lamar Jackson finished 2023 with career highs in passing attempts, 457, and passing yards with 3,678. The Jackson to Andrews connection has always been one of the best quarterback to tight end connections in the NFL. Even with the emergence of the 2023 first round selection, Zay Flowers, who I like a lot, there's still a shot that Andrews is a top 3 tight end for fantasy football in 2024. Diontae Johnson is one of my favorite values in fantasy football right now, and I love the opportunity to bounce back. The Steelers' passing game in general has been down for the last 2 seasons, which directly correlates to Diontae Johnson being down for fantasy football the last 2 seasons. Back in 2021, Johnson earned 169 targets. He caught 107 of them for 1,161 receiving yards and scored 8 touchdowns. He averaged 17.9 fantasy points per game that season, which ranked 8th for the position. So it was a dominant fantasy football season. Johnson has earned 147, 169, and 144 targets from 2022 back to 2020, which shows he is an elite target earner. Diontae Johnson is now a Carolina Panther. He's the new wide receiver 1 for the former 2023 first overall pick, Bryce Young, who has been desperate, I think, for a wide receiver one. Adam Thielen looked very good for an extended period of time in 2023. Is he a wide receiver one at his age right now? No, right? I think we saw him kind of die off, but we did see Bryce Young support him to success in fantasy football, which I think he will to Diontae Johnson in 2024. Young attempted the 12th most passes in 2023 with 527. And I think Johnson, DJ, is a candidate for 140 plus targets in 2024. So we've seen the production in the past for fantasy football. I think we see it again in 2024. Joe Burrow, no-brainer to bounce back in 2024. In 2023, he played just 9 full games due to injury. In the 2 seasons prior, Burrow passed for 4,527 and 4,611 yards in 36 and 34 touchdowns. In these 2022 and 2021 seasons, Burrow finished with 21.7, which ranked 4th, and 20.5, which ranked 10th fantasy points per game. We regard Burrow as one of the best talents at the position, right? But 2 seasons, he's only played 10 games. So that brings hesitation. 2023 and 2020, 10 games played due to injury. Burrow averaged a career high in passing attempts per game in 2023 with 36.5. And looking at their backfield, I wouldn't be surprised if he's one of the leaders in passing attempts in 2024. I think they are going to have to push the ball downfield through the air. And with the combination of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, of course, that should be part of the game plan on top of Joe Burrow's skill set. You also have the potential of third-round rookie Jermaine Burton, newcomer tight end Mike Gesicki. There's another rookie tight end, Eric All, who's kind of turning some heads right now. I think there's some complementary pieces that can support Burrow on top of arguably one of the best wide receiver duos in the NFL. I feel like I'm one of the only guys right now hyping up a Deshaun Watson bounce back. And a lot of people will say he wasn't good last season, but I beg to defer when it comes to fantasy football. He played just 5 full games in 2023, and he finishes a top 10 fantasy quarterback in 3 of those games. Fantasy scoring is not foreign to Deshaun Watson, but 12 total games played across the last 2 seasons after not playing at all in 2021 makes people forget. From 2020 back to 2018, Watson averaged 23.5, which ranked 2nd, 22, which ranked 5th, and 21.3 fantasy points per game. Basically, every season that he's played a full season, he's been a top 5 quarterback in fantasy points per game. He was once regarded as one of the elite quarterbacks in the league, and the dual threat resume is there via the examples of 4,165 passing yards in 2019. He rushed for 551 yards in 2018. We saw fantasy relevance in 2023 through a small window, but we've seen plenty of it through the past. I think Joe Flacco thriving last season, although they are very different quarterbacks, is also a very green flag that the starting quarterback could be successful in the Cleveland Browns offense. The trio of Amari Cooper, David Njoku, and newcomer, who I've always had a soft spot for, Jerry Jeudy, are a solid supporting cast for Watson to bounce back for fantasy football and be a big part of lineups this coming season. Another guy I've been very bullish on this season, another guy that I feel like I've been on an island for as far as content goes, is Javonte Williams. And now there's some stuff coming out in camp that kind of supports it after everybody's been out on the guy after last season. Following an ACL tear in 2022, Javonte Williams finished 6 weeks as a top 24 fantasy running back in 2023, and he caught 47 balls. Back in his rookie season, he finished 4 weeks as a top 10 fantasy running back, 3 weeks with over 20 fantasy points, ranked 6th in both evaded tackles and yards created via Player Profiler, and he finished 22nd in fantasy points per game. The Denver backfield is one of the bigger question marks heading into 2024. A lot of people are out on Williams due to a down 2023 season and typically will not acknowledge that he was recovering from an ACL tear the year prior. I think sometimes people look at Breece Hall tearing an ACL and then going crazy for fantasy football in an Adrian Peterson sort of way and think that's the norm, but it's an asterisk. It's actually not anywhere near the norm. Undrafted rookie Jaleel McLaughlin flashed some efficiency in 2023 and seems to be the offseason darling of the fantasy community. He has some efficiency metrics, even though he was a poor prospect in terms of how the NFL viewed him. He also barely touched the ball, but apparently he's, the next Alvin Kamara because Sean Payton is the head coach. I'm very anti that. I think he could have a role, but I think people have overhyped him to an extent I don't understand. Audric Estime out of Notre Dame in the 5th round. The coach has been speaking highly of him. I think he's the handcuff to Javonte Williams. I think he could be the future running back one. I actually really liked him as a prospect. But for me, the only guy that profiles as the potential running back one for Denver is Javonte Williams. And he is being underdrafted right now for a guy that can touch the ball 200 to 250 times in 2024. We once regarded this guy as one of the next up-and-coming running backs prior to his injury. After that rookie season, that was impressive. Christian Watson. In 2023, Christian Watson played just 9 games, but tied for the team lead in targets per game with 5.9. And he finished 22nd for the position in yards per reception at 15.1. Watson capped off his 2023 season with wide receiver 13 and wide receiver 8 finishes in his last 2 games. Back in 2022 as a rookie, Watson, weeks 10 through 13 with Aaron Rodgers, finished as the wide receiver 3, wide receiver 8, wide receiver 10, and wide receiver 8 during that span, displaying a ton of receiving yard upside, but mostly touchdown upside. He scored 8 touchdowns during that span. 4,159 passing yards and 32 passing touchdowns for Jordan Love in his first season as the starting quarterback was very encouraging for all of the weapons. And Green Bay loves them some Jordan Love. They paid him a lot of money, and he would probably tell you he deserves it because he had a really big season, and I think he elevated the guys around him. Watson has shown us upside in both yardage and touchdown scoring, like I've said before. I think health has been the issue, right? 9 and 14 games played in his first 2 seasons. I think a full season could be filled with more big plays, more touchdown opportunities, and a guy that can fight for the wide receiver 1 role in Green Bay. Christian Kirk. In 2023, Christian Kirk played in 12 games and averaged 7.1 targets, 65.6 receptions, and 12.5 fantasy points per game. This comes after a career year in 2022 where Kirk earned 133 targets. He caught 84 of them for 1,108 receiving yards, scored 8 touchdowns, and averaged 14.2 fantasy points per game, which ranked 18th. Life after Arizona and Jacksonville for Kirk looks solid when he's on the field. Calvin Ridley vacates 136 targets in 2024, which will be up for grabs. Evan Ingram just had a career year in 2023, and the Jaguars selected Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU in the first round of the 2024 NFL Draft. But I think Christian Kirk has a solidified role in this offense. I think there's a clear connection with Trevor Lawrence. I think he provides a safe flex floor for fantasy football managers as a reliable slot outlet. I don't know if he's going to have the upside that's going to win you your weeks, but I think he's a guy that you can safely put into your lineups, and I think he deserves to be on this list as a bounce back. Cooper Kupp. The last 2 seasons have not been ideal for Cooper Kupp, playing in just 12 and 9 games, especially after the Triple Crown 2021 season where Kupp earned 191 targets, caught 145 of them for 1,947 receiving yards, and scored 16 touchdowns. He averaged 25.9 fantasy points per game, which of course ranked first that year. In 2023, Kupp averaged 7.9 targets, 4.9 receptions, 61.4 receiving yards, and 13.7 fantasy points per game, which ranked 23rd. Not terrible, obviously not a Triple Crown sort of season, but not terrible, right? Matthew Stafford indicated just recently that both Kupp and 2023 superstar Puka Nacua would be on the field and be fed in 2024. If you look at the targets in the weeks that both of those guys played, the Rams wide receivers were both indeed fed each of those weeks. I have it in front of me. Weeks 5, I'm going to go Kupp and then Puka. Weeks 5, 12 and 11 targets. Week 6, 9 and 7. Week 7, 7 and 12. Week 8, 10 and 7. Week 9, 7 and 7. Week 12, 5 and 8. Week 13, 8 and 7. Week 14, 10 and 9. Week 15, 8 and 8. Week 16, 12, and 11. In week 17, 6 and 8. There's plenty of weeks I just talked about there that Cooper Kupp actually out-targeted Puka, but Puka had a lot more upside, I think. I think both guys can be fed. I think both guys, as long as they stay healthy and Matthew Stafford stays healthy, can be successful for fantasy football in 2024. Jalen Waddle played in 14 games in 2023, averaged 14.2 fantasy points per game, which ranked 21st. Not a bad year, but a down one when looking at Waddle's previous 2 seasons, where he averaged 15.3 and 15.4 fantasy points per game, which both ranked within the top 15. It was 12th and 15th in points per game. Waddle finished number 13 in yards per target in 2023, but finished number 1 in the metric in 2022 with 11.7, along with number 1 in yards per reception, 18.1. In 2022, Waddle produced heavy receiving yards with 1,356, which shows he has that in his bag. Tyreek Hill had a monster 2023 season, but even operating as a wide receiver 2 could mean big things for Waddle in 2024. Just seeing the passing upside in Miami. Tua Tagovailoa just led the NFL in passing yards with 4,624. And he checked a ton of efficiency and accuracy boxes this past year. The Hill and Waddle combination is one of the best in the NFL, and both of these guys can explode for fantasy football in 2024. Najee Harris. So in 2023, he finished 30th in fantasy points per game for the position at 11.5 points per game, which as a whole doesn't sound super great, right? But weeks 11 through 18, following the firing of the Steelers offensive coordinator, Harris ranked 4th in rushing yards, 571 during the span. And during the fantasy football playoffs, weeks 16 through 18, Harris scored the 3rd most fantasy points. With the change in Pittsburgh came a much more productive Najee Harris at the end of the day. The same Najee Harris who has rushed for over 1,000 yards for 3 straight seasons. This offseason, the Steelers added not 1 but 2 quarterback upgrades in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. The Steelers also added a much-needed set of offensive linemen via the 1st, 2nd, and 4th rounds of the 2024 NFL Draft. That was the biggest need, I think, for Najee since he's been in the NFL, is people in front of him that actually can block and create some lanes there. So 2024 is a contract year for Najee Harris. And if he picks up where he left off at the end of the season, I think we can see a top 15 to 20 fantasy season for him, which makes him a value in drafts right now. Terry McLaurin in 2023 finished 34th in fantasy points per game for the position after finishing inside the top 30 fantasy wide receivers in the 4 seasons prior. McLaurin has finished 4 straight seasons over 1,000 receiving yards. He's earned 130-plus targets in 3 of those 4 seasons. McLaurin's averaged 13.5 fantasy points per game in 3 of his 5 total seasons. I think an improved coaching staff, along with the drafting of 2023 Heisman Trophy winner Jaden Daniels with the 2nd overall pick, are 2 very supporting factors for McLaurin to bounce back for fantasy football. You know, you look at an improved offense, an improved system, that gives him the potential boost to step up, especially if Jaden Daniels is the stud that a lot of us are projecting him to be. McLaurin's the clear-cut wide receiver 1, so I think that supports him having himself a nice bounce-back year. All right, my final guy on the list, very excited to talk about him. Let's talk Jonathan Taylor. So Jonathan Taylor, let's flash back to 2021. Number 1 in carries, 332. Number 1 in red zone touches, 92. Number 1 in rushing yards, 1,811. 56 targets, 40 receptions. Number 1 in total touchdowns with 20. Number 1 in yards created via player profiler. Number 3 in yards per touch. Number 1 in juke rate. Number 1 in evaded tackles. Number 1 in breakaway runs. Number 1 in fantasy points per game. A lot of number 1s for Jonathan Taylor. So we've seen a massive, massive season out of him. Let's look at 2023 in the 10 games he played, but he played 8 games at 50% plus of the snaps. So here's some of the flashes there. 95 yards, week 8, 91 yards, week 12, 96 rushing yards, week 17, 188 rushing yards to end the season in week 18, running back 7 in week 7, running back 7 in week 9, running back 9 in week 12, running back 13 in week 17, and running back 3 in week 18. 15.6 fantasy points per game, ranked 12th. He also has been extended 3 years, $42 million. So you check the boxes for Jonathan Taylor. 2 bounce back for fantasy football. He gets workhorse volume. He doesn't have competition that's going to take anything away from him. Heavy production on his profile in yardage and fantasy points. Efficiency metrics, solidified role in a growing offense. Fantasy football upside from 2021, as well as this last season when he was actually on the field. And you got to like this Colts growing offense. Anthony Richardson is a dynamic playmaking quarterback. Michael Pittman Jr., the alpha wide receiver 1. You have A.D. Mitchell and Josh Downs as complement pieces to the passing game. But Jonathan Taylor is the rock in the backfield. And I think that he's going to be a guy that can lead the league in rushing yards this year. I think he's a guy that can lead the league in rushing touchdowns. So Jonathan Taylor, I'm all in on him bouncing back and being the stud we know for fantasy football. That's going to do it, though, guys. Appreciate it if you guys check this one out. Make sure you are subscribed wherever you are consuming this, whether it's YouTube, iTunes, Spotify. Make sure you're following the Fantrax page. And we're going to be grinding this offseason, always with the intention to help you guys play to win. My name's Nick Skrip. Going to be plugging tons of content this offseason. You can find me on Twitter or X at P2W Fantasy. I drop threads, articles, graphics, data drops, short videos, long videos, streams like this, just about everything. So follow me there. I'll help you win those ships this year. Thanks, guys.